thanks everybody for being here. Thanks for just for making the effort to want to be leaders in a pretty tough time that we're going through. But tough times make tough people, and I think we need to be strong for the rest of us. And if we can arm ourselves with that knowledge that we can use to inspire others, and having the knowledge can also help us to be more confident. Then we can help to break the narrative down and take power from those that are trying to basically commit genocide, in my opinion. Now, Judy, I just want to thank you for being here with us. I really want you to inspire our guys here from the Peacemakers, and we've got people from the Heal Me platform as well joining us. Look, it's a real blessing to have you here. We know that, obviously you're a doctor, you've been quite outspoken, and you have some confidence behind you. I've heard you speak before, and I'm very impressed with sort of how you articulate yourself. And I just want you to share some of that with us. And I'm going to go through some questions, and I'm not going to, if you can't answer one, or maybe there's something you don't want to say for whatever reason, okay, we understand. But if there's something specific that you want to say that you think we need to hear, please, if you're, happy for you to take us on a different tangent if you want to go in on a tangent. But is there anything that you want to say before, we get started, or?
Yeah, firstly, I'd just like to say that I'm a PhD doctor, and my expertise is in the history of the control of infectious diseases. So specifically how we controlled these diseases. I finished this PhD in 2015, December, and it was published on the university website in January 2016. And of course, I have just been completely denigrated, ridiculed, defamed. There was no academic debate. That's all been suppressed. So that's what people need to know. They need to know that the science has been suppressed, and that you've been receiving biased information for decades, actually. I can say it's probably 3 decades now. And so eventually I published my research as a book, because in the end, I had been putting my research out in a newsletter. It went global. I had 33,000 downloads of the PhD. So I published it in a book, and that book was called Vaccination, Australia's Loss of Health Freedom, okay? And it became available to everybody in March 2020, when you're all being locked up, okay? So I didn't have a crystal ball. This is a completely political situation that has been manipulated, and we are all being manipulated through these political structures that are actually hidden to the public. So I just thought I'd leave that with you, and if you want to ask me any questions, that we can go and do that now.
Yeah, okay. No, thank you so much. Well, I guess I wanted to discuss sort of the doctor-patient relationship, and how important the doctor-patient relationship is, and just get your thoughts on that.
Well, as you've just heard, I've been watching, particularly over the last decade. Okay, so as I said, this has been happening for 3 decades, ever since they removed liability from any drug that's called a vaccine. And that happened in 1986. So the reason that they removed liability, that is any harm caused by any drug that's called a vaccine, was because the pharmaceutical companies were paying out millions of dollars in compensation through the 80s for all the deaths and illnesses that the vaccines were causing. So they went to the US Congress. They described these drugs as life-saving products, and Ronald Reagan signed that act that removed any liability. They indemnified pharmaceutical companies for any drug that's put on a market as a vaccine. So that's been happening. And then over the last decade particularly, we were trying to, because the vaccination program was expanding so rapidly, and there's now 16 vaccines on the childhood program. For a decade now, I've watched as the government took control over doctors, and they've silenced the doctors, they've gagged them. And that was through the Australian Health Practitioners Regulatory Authority. So what happened there was that doctors are required now to promote government vaccination policies, And that means that the patient interest, they can no longer abide by their medical ethics, okay? They can no longer put the patient's best interest first because they're promoting government vaccination policies which involve drugs. And of course, the fundamental tenet of medicine is genetics determines the outcome from any drug that you receive. Okay, that's the fundamental tenet of medicine, and it's part of epigenetics. Okay, so if chemicals in the body then switch on genes that otherwise wouldn't have got switched on, and many of our genes are linked to chronic illnesses. So we call that a predisposition to disease. So this is the tragedy that's happened over the last decade. That doctor-patient relationship has now been torn apart. Doctors are no longer abiding by medical ethics. They're actually violating their medical ethics because they're not giving fully informed consent without coercion, manipulation, or pressure to a vaccine. And of course, that's described, that's the actual wording in the Australian Immunisation Handbook, which is the directives for doctors to give vaccines. Okay, so I've watched this over 10 years. They've violated medical ethics. They've violated the actual principles of medicine, because every doctor is educated to know that you must give a drug to a person with advice regarding their own specific circumstances and genetics. There is no drug that you can give blanketly to an entire genetically diverse population. And what is actually happening at this point in time is we are creating a dysfunctional society where the vaccines are actually destroying the genetic fabric of society because these chronic illnesses, we've watched as they've, over 30 years, as they've increased in children. You know, this isn't, the evidence is right before our eyes. There was a direct dose response relationship to every vaccine that was put on the schedule and the decline in children's health. Mm-hmm. And that's why doctors don't promote vaccination policies on the improvements in health outcomes that are seen in the population or in children, because they can't. Human health has declined significantly with this epidemic of autoimmune diseases and other chronic illnesses, neurological damage, and of course, autism, which has been exponential. And of course, that's encephalopathy, brain damage, okay? And that's all linked on the package inserts. And in fact, our Australian immunologist, the Nobel Prize laureate in 1960, Macfarlane Burnet, actually predicted that the long-term consequence of using more and more vaccines in the population would be the genetic deterioration of the population. And he said this would be, against the best interests of the state. You see, so that, it's not rocket science, but nobody was standing up for medical ethics and making doctors accountable, or the government, okay? And the problem here is that the medical regulator, as I said, the Australian Health Practitioners Regulatory Authority, it's actually a government board. Okay, it's a government board and an incorporated business. But being a government board, it's controlled by ministers who are actually designing vaccination policy. Okay, so they have gagged doctors on the risks of vaccines, the chronic illnesses that come out. It can come out immediately, or it can be months or years later. Okay, and doctors are now being gagged on that. We're not getting scientific debate. You're all getting ridiculed and denigrated if you talk about risks of vaccines. That's just an anti-vaxxer. And doctors can be removed from their practice. They're deregistered if they present the risks of vaccines that I have discovered in the medical literature in my research. Okay, so that's what's happened over a period of 30 years. It has been violated.
So that's the mechanism that they're using to silence the medical practitioners. Okay,
correct.
Do any of these, I'm going to get right into it, do any of these medical staff actually learn about the Nuremberg Code when they're studying?
That's a very good question, Nick, because the other prong here to the suppression of the debate is the knowledge that doctors are given in medical school now. That education is funded by the pharmaceutical companies, okay? So they've used selective studies, and they use recent studies that have been designed. See, an epidemiological study, you can choose the parameters of that study. So you can pretty well design any study to prove the outcome you want. That's literally an epidemiological study. So when you see a study with a conclusion on it, unless you go back and look at the design of that study, you don't know whether that was an accurate conclusion or not. And of course, this industry-funded science is being used to educate doctors, and they're not taught about what did control infectious diseases. They're now being taught that vaccines controlled these diseases, when there were no mass vaccination campaigns in 1950, when all of these infectious diseases, the risk had been removed. That is, the hospitalizations and deaths. Okay, so this is the tragedy. You've got of course, money is power. That's what you need to know. And money is now controlling education. And even in the school curriculums, you'll notice the indoctrination now saying that vaccines controlled these diseases, and they didn't. But you know, you need to have a look at one of my webinars to understand how that has been you know, indoctrinated into the public, and what did control these diseases. So yeah, it's the regulatory board that's preventing them from speaking about the true risks of vaccines, and even the benefits are exaggerated as well, okay? And they're not required to prove that a vaccine can create herd immunity before they put it on the national program. And that was stated by Terry Nolan. It's an actual quote. You know, it's not a necessary characteristic before you put a drug on the national vaccination program. So that's what's happened today with COVID, but it's been even more blatant. You see, they didn't even trial it for 1 year before they had it on the market. The trial was the human population, and it is the human population. And Greg Hunter's told you that. The TGA is telling you that, and the lawyers are telling you that. This, you know, but because this drug has been called a vaccine, everybody is conditioned to that word vaccine. And they're not even investigating, they're just walking in to get this drug that actually is new, untested genetic technology. And it has unknown consequences, as well as all the documented blood clots, myocarditis, pericarditis, anaphylaxis, autoimmune diseases, you know, and deaths, convulsions, and seizures. You see, so this is what we have. We've just got a word that people have been led to believe that you've actually got a drug that has very few side effects in everybody and is beneficial to you. And it's just simply not true.
Do you think that a lot of the medical staff and practitioners are aware of this? Or do you think they're just completely blinded?
I think that they would have to be aware of it, because you see, the fundamental tenet of medicine is that you can't give any drug blanketly across a genetically diverse population. Doctors are taught that a drug must be given to individuals with knowledge of their circumstances, their host characteristics, their environment, and particularly their genetics and their gender and all these sorts of things. You know, this is the tragedy. So many of them would know, but it was hard for them to speak up on their own because they just got sidelined and their reputations were destroyed, as well as they could be deregistered. Mm-hmm. So for a while there, they have been sitting with this knowledge. Many of them do know, but probably a lot of them don't because of their education. And it's not in their interest to find out, because ethically, you know, you can't do your job comfortably once you are aware of the full knowledge of the risks and benefits of these vaccines. So it wasn't worth their interest to research it for themselves. And there's a lot of bonuses and things that you get for actually giving injections. Lots of bonuses. The medical centres themselves actually get a lump sum for raising the immunisation rates of children. You know, so all of these things are going on, and the money is controlling people's behaviour.
Okay. Okay, yeah. This is really, really interesting. This is so. Are you able to? Maybe what I'll do is I'll, if you can send me your like your website, we've got a lot of this information. I'll email it out to the people out there.
Absolutely. My website is vaccinationdecisions.net, and I have put up a lot of this research, you know, under topics on there so that people can see, you know, what did control these diseases and how a virus even causes disease. But also, so there's a link to the PhD as well. So you can see I've gone into the politics of vaccination programs and how we've arrived at a situation where government controls the doctors. And you see, if you've got a government that's designing vaccination policies, they're then deciding the acceptance and knowledge that doctors can provide to the public, you know, if they're regulating the doctor's ability to practice medicine. So that's the biggest conflict of interest we've got, but it's compounded by, you know, we've got a medical regulator, the TGA, the Therapeutic Goods Administrator, that approves drugs for the market, but it also is required to monitor their safety in the population. But that body, although it's called a government body, it's 100% funded by industry. Okay, so the drugs it's approving, it profits from. And if it's a vaccine, there's no incentive to properly test for safety because they're indemnified. The pharmaceutical companies, even if they harm the population, they're not liable. So as a regulator, they never had that incentive to actually set up an active surveillance system. And unless you set up an active surveillance system, then you can't actually determine causal links to the diseases that are being caused from the vaccines, because you need to monitor the health outcomes from every vaccinated person for a period of at least 5 to 10 years. Because what people also haven't been told is that these reactions come out months and years later, okay? It's not immediate. You can have that injection and you'll be fine for weeks, possibly, months. But autoimmune diseases, what you're doing is you're injecting chemicals into the body that take a while to interfere with your body systems and to cause, you know, dysfunctioning parts to the system, which create disease. The autoimmune diseases take months and years to develop, just as cancer does. Cancer can take up to, you know, 30 years. But that injection was most likely the cause of it. And the public's not being informed of that. And doctors are not being educated to know that the chronic illnesses are linked to the injections, the vaccines. You know, this is so that they'll promote the vaccines and, you know, they're paid to actually give people these injections.
So what do you reckon the general belief is among doctors regarding like this whole pandemic situation?
They have been told that this is a really scary virus and that everybody that's exposed to it will get extremely sick. And that is just completely false. And the problem we have here is that the diagnosis of disease is one, it's a grey area of science, and two, it's non-transparent to the public. Okay, so it's when somebody dies, they die of 3 or 4 different morbidities. Okay, that's what we call comorbidity. And to some degree, you know, diagnosing death is a subjective thing. They can decide what the cause is. And we know that all sorts of reporting issues were changed in 2020, for example, with the elderly population. For decades, you know, the elderly died with flu, but not from the flu. So in other words, an elderly person who's got, diabetes or heart problems or stroke, they're more vulnerable to a flu virus. And so when they passed away after getting flu-like symptoms, you would say there were two parts to the death certificate, and the primary cause was always put down as the underlying health issue, the diabetes or the heart disease or the stroke. And then flu was put down as the secondary cause. But in 2020, for the very first time, they reversed that. And just based on suspected flu-like symptoms, a death could be put down as a COVID death, and the underlying cause was the secondary cause, okay? The heart disease or the diabetes or whatever. And of course, these things aren't transparent to the public. And even to the nurses on the wards and the doctors, if they're being told that the deaths are all due to COVID, nobody's proving that. There's no evidence of that. It's just, what they're being told. And that's where a lot of doctors have gone along with the narrative. I mean, that's what they're required to do. Otherwise, they get deregistered. So it's not, many of them are waking up and they've joined the COVID Medical Network, which is the Australian Doctors Speaking Up. And of course, that's happening all around the world now. Doctors are trying to speak up against their medical regulators and stand up for medical ethics, because all we're asking for is fully informed consent to every medication, including vaccines, so that, and doctors are required to provide all the risks of a medical treatment and all the benefits. And when there's other treatments available, doctors are required to actually tell patients that those other treatments are available, and that, and in this particular case, the government's even telling you this drug won't prevent you getting COVID. It won't prevent you dying from COVID. It won't prevent COVID from transmitting in the population. And yet they're mandating this for every human being. That's the crime. And they're not hiding anything from you. I'm working with a team of lawyers at People for Safe Vaccines, and we have all that information that's been taken directly from the Therapeutic Goods Administration website and the public health assessment reports from the pharmaceutical companies. So nothing's being hidden from you. Scott Morrison's openly saying it won't stop you getting COVID. And yet we've got premiers that are allowing businesses to mandate an injection in their employees, even though there's no contract that says they're allowed to medicate their employees. There is nothing lawful about anything that's happening. It's literally a violation of every medical ethic and international human rights principle. And also there's no law for it. There's no law to coerce any vaccine in the Australian population. That's why Scott Morrison can say vaccines are just voluntary. You're required to take them with fully informed consent after the doctor's provided you with the risks and benefits. That's what he's saying, because there's no health law to mandate a vaccine in any human being in Australia.
Yeah, it's like they're coercing the employers. The government's coercing the employers to commit the crimes against the employees.
That's correct. They're giving them incentives to do that. They're encouraging them to do that, and requiring them to do that actually without any risk assessment, and even with the knowledge that the injection won't prevent you getting the disease. So it's not a vaccine, okay? If this drug doesn't prevent the disease, it's not a vaccine. So it's being falsely promoted to you, and people are literally walking into their own deaths and illnesses. And I'll tell you one other thing. Doctors have been told they're not allowed to put vaccine as the cause of those illnesses that are developing after you get an injection directly into the human body. It doesn't make any sense, and it's not even rocket science. But because 80% of the public trust their doctors, they're actually listening to their doctors when the doctors say to them, oh, no, your father-in-law didn't die because he just had the vaccine 2 days before. It was his heart disease or his, stroke or whatever. But that's being brought on by these drugs, and people have unfortunately been indoctrinated to believe that vaccines don't have side effects, and that if they do, they come out immediately. And of course, that's completely false. It will take months and years for many of these adverse events to come out.
So what can you explain to us what an mRNA vaccine is?
Yeah, well, that's a very important knowledge that people need. A messenger RNA vaccine, I won't call it a vaccine, it's actually an injection, okay? Because it won't prevent you getting this disease. So a messenger RNA is actually nucleic acid. We've got RNA and we've got DNA, and the DNA is the blueprint of life. And the messenger RNA actually codes for proteins in our body. So this messenger RNA that's actually being injected is a synthetic protein, a synthetic molecule. And it's actually being injected into the body in a capsule called a nanolipid particle. Now, nanoparticles are toxic to humans anyway. And this nanolipid particle, the envelope has what it's called polyethylene glycol. It's a chemical that's never been in any other vaccine before, but they know that many people are allergic to it. It causes anaphylaxis. So for many people, they'll get anaphylaxis within the first 30 minutes of getting that injection. And the two vaccines that have messenger RNA in them are the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna vaccine, okay? The AstraZeneca and your Johnson & Johnson, they are injecting the synthetic spike protein into the body through a different mechanism, okay? With the messenger RNA goes into the body, and then it uses our cells to manufacture the spike protein, and then our antibodies will produce, then our body produces antibodies whenever the spike protein is present in the body. With AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson, that spike protein is a synthetic protein that's being injected into the body through an adenovirus, a chimpanzee adenovirus, in the case of the AstraZeneca. So that's just an attenuated or weakened virus from chimpanzees. And inside that will be the synthetic spike protein that will enter our bodies. And that's the antigen that our body will react to produce antibodies, okay? Now, the problem here is you've got a synthetic spike protein. That spike protein is very similar to 20 other proteins in our body. So what happens is once it's in our body, it actually moves all around the body, and the body produces, it starts to attack itself. Our immune system will start to attack itself because of that spike protein being so similar to other proteins in our body. And that's why it's predicted that autoimmune diseases will develop, you know, between 2 and 20 years after you get the injections. And the spike protein also accumulates in the ovaries. Okay, so as does the nanolipid particles. And that it is believed that infertility is going to be another side effect of this injection. We're also seeing lots of stillbirths and miscarriages for pregnant women as well. All the statistics are there.
Yeah, I was talking to a friend, and this friend was working, actually it was the mother of this friend of mine, and it was just the other day, and she was saying that she's the only one that hasn't been vaccinated. She's like, I think she's a medical scientist, or she works in that field anyway. She's the only one that hasn't been vaccinated there. He said all the other women haven't had their periods for 3 months.
That's right. We're hearing lots of stories of the disruption of the menstrual cycle once people have the injection, and there is a bit of transmission between vaccinated people and unvaccinated people regarding that spike protein. That's what we're hearing from doctors, and there's lots of anecdotal evidence of that happening. So yeah, there's lots of consequences, even unknown consequences from these injections. So despite the blood clots, and we know many pilots have already died from the blood clots, and I believe Delta Airlines now is not going to enforce the injections on its pilots. But, you know, Qantas and all the rest of them, I mean, none of us are going to feel safe flying anyway now because, you know, blood clots is a very serious and real risk from the injections. And we know people have been driving their cars and keeling over, well, you know, from after they've had an injection. So these things are happening. And with the messenger RNA, it has the potential to insert into our own blueprint. Okay, now what that means is we won't know the full consequences of the health effects of these injections until after the next generation, because the potential is there for messenger RNA to insert into the blueprint and change it for the next generation. And they know that, see, this is genetic engineering in humans. And it's even been described as transhumanism. You know, there's a whole range of things that the public hasn't been told about what's in these injections.
Potentially getting rid of the undesirable people and keeping other, you know, other people alive, eugenics, all of the above.
Well, all of that has come into the agenda, and it's very clearly a population control and surveillance agenda. The pandemic is a facade. You know, we do not have a public health emergency in Australia or in many other countries that was all called on a mathematical model that used industry assumptions. Okay, and you can't do that. You can't use generic data to say that there's going to be a pandemic in every country, because every country has different environmental conditions and host characteristics, and even quality of healthcare, and all of those things affect the virulence of a virus, because a virus doesn't actually cause disease unless there's poor environmental conditions. So, of course, a place like Australia is not likely to, you know, have a pandemic. We might get an outbreak, but, you know, until you've got real evidence, you don't close down countries. You don't lock up healthy people. You know, all of that was bogus. It's not based on science, and that's all reported in my thesis and in my book, Vaccination, Australia's Loss of Health Freedom. I've described, you know, how viruses cause disease and why this isn't a pandemic. You know, that's the fallacy of what we're dealing with. So it's a facade for the economic reset that's happening. The economy is collapsing, and they're redesigning it. And also this is social engineering in the population. And as you say, population control, and, you know, under the sustainability term, they're looking at depopulation.
Yeah, it makes sense why they're, you know, they're propagating these political ideas into the minds of the children in school. You know, they're getting them to go into the city and protest for climate change and all the rest of it. You know, there's too many people in the world, and they push these ideas on the children because I guess that's their investment. If they can convince people of that narrative at that age, you know, they're going to cause, you know, the thought precedes the action, and if the thoughts of in these young minds are solidified through that indoctrination process, then what's going to manifest in the future?
Yeah, that's correct, Nick, because yes, indoctrination is what they've worked on, but we're no longer in the scientific age, okay? We're all pretending we're talking about evidence-based medicine, but in fact, the peer-reviewed system is broken because what the public doesn't recognize is that the journals are owned by the pharmaceutical companies, and they're determining what's promoted to the public as science. And the corporations own the big tech companies that are censoring the science on those, and you're only getting biased information both in the mainstream media and in the big tech, you know, platforms. But even at the universities, most of the funding now is industry funding. It's not independent or government controlled, and when government actually collaborates with industry, as well as we are seeing over the last decades, the public-private partnerships, they were actually formed, and they formed the Gavi Alliance, the Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunisation, which is actually advising the World Health Organization. So your facade was the World Health Organization, which has a charter to promote independent, objective science. But behind that, we are corporate public partnerships, the Federation of Pharmaceutical Companies, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, and then they tied that in with the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank and all the governments. And there's your public-private partnerships that were designing global health policies that bingo, we were all required to sign up to the International Health Regulations in 2005. That is all the member countries of the WHO. So that in 2020, when they called a pandemic, every country had to behave in the same way as designed by the International Health Regulations that were put in place by the Federation of Pharmaceutical Companies in the Gavi Alliance with Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and your International Monetary Fund, etc. So that's where the collaboration came from. And of course, that was something that was, blew me away when I went to do this research. I mean, it didn't even occur to me to look at global health policy. I went to university to look at what controlled infectious diseases because I had noticed as a teacher in the schools all the increase in vaccines on this program and the decrease in health of the children. That became very obvious to teachers. And so I went back to the university. And of course, I studied, just the design of public health policy. And of course, thought I'd finished the PhD. But we had an international examiner, and he said, oh, no, what about global health policies? So I had to spend a whole extra year learning about how the Gavi Alliance now controls the public health policies of every WHO member country. And that's how we got these, vaccination programs, the same programs in every country. And of course, the pandemic preparedness plans that were put in place under the International Health Regulations that required these coordinated moves by every government as soon as the pandemic was called, based on a mathematical model.
I just want to. I've got a couple of questions I want to ask you about the PCR test. But before I do, why do you do it? Why do you speak out? What is it that the mechanism inside of you that inspires you to do this?
Well, health. I'm a parent, 3 kids, and of course, a parent only has health as their motive for doing anything. And the parents that are speaking up, we get sidelined, we get ridiculed, we get denigrated. But the vaccine program is all based on false foundations. It's a lie. The vaccines were only ever a secondary measure in controlling infectious diseases, and the vast majority of the control, in fact, the risk of hospitalisation and death was all removed by 1950 in Australia, and many diseases such as whooping cough, measles and influenza were removed from the National Notifiable Disease List, okay, which means that the cases, they knew that in developed countries, cases of disease, right, think cases because that's what they're telling you about this flu-like illness, all cases in developed countries were mild or asymptomatic, meaning no symptoms, but you get immunity because you've had exposure to the virus. But that doesn't mean that you're at risk of either getting the disease seriously or even passing disease on to someone else, because you can only get disease from a virus if your own immune system is run down, or you lack of nutrients, or it's immunocompromised, or you're living in poor health environment. Yeah. What my health has nothing to do with your health when you're exposed to these viruses. And remember, we're exposed to them all the time. They live in our bodies and they don't do anything. They're dormant. A virus actually isn't living. It's actually a dormant structure, and it only causes disease when you're in health around you, either your physical environment or your host characteristics are all run down, and lack of nutrition, etc. So there's a whole lot of false information that has been provided to the public about diseases. And of course, I could see that you see, once they started, it was 2015 when they started this no jab, no pay, no jab, no play, and they brought in coercive vaccination without any health law to do it, okay? But of course, that's causing kids to be sick. The chronic illnesses in kids, 50% of them, they've got chronic illnesses. They'll never reach their potential in life. We've got millions of autistic children now, and these are linked to the vaccines. As I said, the genetics, individual genetics determines how each person will react to a vaccine. So some won't react at all, but others will be destroyed for life. The neurological damage, the anaphylaxis, the seizures and the convulsions are all happening after these vaccines, and it was being covered up. So of course, the parents like myself that are speaking up for the health of the population. And what sort of a future have we got if we don't fight now for bodily autonomy, when the government is now trying to get every adult to take an experimental drug that they have no idea what the medium and long-term consequences are, and the short-term consequences are horrendous, So it's the world we live in, Nick. For me, I'm not happy to live in a world that's coercing people with drugs. The pharmaceutical company, that was their goal, was to actually sell drugs to healthy people. That's a quote. And they've now achieved it. We're right at the pinnacle of that. And humanity and spirituality is actually about to be lost if the population does not rise up now. And if every jabbed and every unjabbed person does not rise up together to say, no, we have a right to choice, because vaccines have always been a choice, even if this was a vaccine, okay? But our kids have no future, Nick. That's why I stand up. And I'm not prepared to live in a world where the drug companies have so much power that we no longer have bodily autonomy. There's no freedom without the right to control what's injected into your own body. That's gone.
Well, I agree with you 100%. Like I believe that I'm a very strong Christian man. I've had faith for a long time. But I really believe that the gift of God that's within us is their ability to make choices. We have the ability to make choices, and when they try to take that away, that's really the final frontier. It's not space, it's the minds of men that they're trying to take over.
Yeah, and could I say to everybody that's listening, vaccines, when they did bring them in, and as I said, it wasn't to reduce the hospitalizations and deaths. 20 years after measles was controlled, and we had measles parties and never worried about it because most cases never ended up in hospital. 20 years later, they brought in a vaccine, and it wasn't to reduce deaths from measles. It was to see if they could eradicate measles, which of course they couldn't. And these vaccines are causing many chronic illnesses that started to get suppressed, and particularly so when they took away liability from the pharmaceutical companies. So I want to say to everybody listening, the vaccines have always been a choice whilst ever we've had them in place. Campaigns, and that's why Morrison says, it's fully informed consent without coercion. They've always been a choice, and we've always lived with vaccinated and unvaccinated people. The debate has never been about pro and anti-vax. And this anti-vaccination label is a label that the medical industry has purposely used and incited the public to divide us, okay? Now, let me tell you what an unvaccinated person is. An unvaccinated person is a healthy person. And we have an immune system that is preventing us getting sick. But what's happened over 30 years is that the public's led to believe that we can't live without vaccines. So now the media uses the word unvaccinated with a bit of a stigma. It's a bit like you're unclean and we need to remove these people from society, okay? But I want everybody to remember that we've always lived with vaccinated and unvaccinated people, and that it's the unvaccinated people that are actually creating the herd immunity in the population. As I said, your immune system does not get fully primed until you are naturally exposed to a virus at the right time of life, and that's over 6 months of age. and usually before adolescence. And during that period, a natural exposure primes your immune system to function properly. And that's that we have a complex immune system that vaccines don't even address the entire immune system. And that's where herd immunity came from. That natural exposure in a developed country without symptoms. Asymptomatic cases are a real thing, but they are healthy people, and they have immunity to the disease. They don't need to be removed, because if you remove the healthy people, then that's the immunity that's building up in the population. Okay, so and they're not even a risk to any other person, because, as I said before, the viruses are around us all the time, and one person will get sick, but the other one won't. And that's to do with your own internal immune system, how it functions, your nutrition levels, your stress levels. When you're run down, you're more susceptible to that virus causing disease. So you've been given a completely false impression of how these diseases are caused. And this ridiculous idea of quarantining healthy people, there's your loss of freedom already. Healthy people are now being locked up, and you're being required to pay $5,000 for the experience, to make yourself sick. Every time you're sitting in that hotel for 14 days, you can't control your food, you can't control your air, you can't control your exercise. Mental health is destroyed. You're a healthy person. Is that living? Is that that's what they're intending for you from now on? The new norm is in. If we don't fight now together, the jabbed and the unjabbed, stand up, rise up right now, that's what they call freedom. And New South Wales, Freedom Day, Monday, 11th of October, they all learned that they had vaccine certificates, and certain people could go into supermarkets and shops, and others couldn't. So freedom now means restrictions, okay? This is all George Orwell's 1984, doublespeak.
It's who bows the knee to Caesar. If you bow the knee to Caesar, then you're going to be all right. But if you don't, then Caesar's going to fight against you. That's
right. So all we're asking everybody to recognise is, prior to 2020, we all knew how to promote health in the population. What they did was they reversed it with all these directives that actually make you sick. If you look them up, they are the reverse to how you promote health in the population. And I'm talking locking up healthy people, social distancing, PCR tests that are invasive, go up the back of the nose. That causes infections, and it breaks the vessels that it's pushing past, and it's close to the brain. Which does reduce your immunity. Okay, there's a whole range of things there that you're not aware of, and all of them are actually creating ill health in the population, and that's part of the agenda that they have for us. It's there.
Well, I had quite a few questions on the PCR test, but maybe, are you able just to explain the whole PCR process and anything that you want to? I'd just like to pick your brain on a little bit, and because I know there's problems there, and I think a lot of us are aware of it, but we're not sure what's true and what's error.
Yeah, well, firstly, you see, a pandemic for decades was always an outbreak of disease where there were enormous numbers of deaths and illnesses. Okay. Now, 2009 was when the World Health Organization changed the definition, and that enabled them to call a pandemic based on cases of disease. But as I've just told you, in developed countries, cases of disease don't indicate risk. And all the public health officials of the mid-20th century, they said, risk is only determined by hospitalizations and deaths. So in 2020, we didn't have any increased deaths and illnesses to flu or to COVID even, okay? They were monitoring cases of disease with a test, this PCR test, that doesn't actually diagnose disease. What that PCR test is meant to do when it's used properly is to identify a virus, but it's only a segment of a virus. And having a virus in you doesn't mean that you're ever going to be sick or get sick or that you can cause sickness in someone else, because as I said, a virus isn't living. And the problem with this PCR test is it only identifies a segment of the virus anyway, so it's still not proof that it's even SARS-CoV-2, the virus that would cause flu-like symptoms. But the way in which they got cases of disease to pretend there was a pandemic was by setting up clinics in the healthy population and monitoring and giving healthy people a test. And if it was positive, we had a case of disease, and that was promoted in the media as cases of disease. Now, these are healthy people without symptoms, okay? And that's the fraud, because they're using a test that doesn't diagnose COVID disease. It identifies the virus SARS-CoV-2 if it's used properly. But with this test, you can actually manipulate positive cases as well. If you use that test with amplifications of over 30, then you are potentially 100% likely to get false positives, okay? 100% of those cases will be false positives. So, and our tests were being run at 40 to 45 amplifications right across Australia, okay? So you can manipulate how many positive cases you're going to get. There's no transparency for the public in the reporting by the media. And those cases are literally people without symptoms. When did the media ever tell you that these cases had any serious symptoms? They didn't, because the cases are literally people without symptoms in the majority of cases, or they might have a cough or a bit of a cold. But no symptoms are ever being given with these cases. Hundreds of cases that are being reported, and that's the fraud. And prior to 2020, they didn't monitor flu in the healthy people. Okay, so that's how you create the appearance of a pandemic, and you use the media to do that, and there's no transparency in your statistics. And there's a whole range of things that also have been done to pull the wool over people's eyes. But that PCR test, it's invasive, and you have a right, everybody has a right to bodily autonomy, and that's protected under the Biosecurity Act 2015. So you can refuse that test. And I know they're threatening people with fines, but if you take it to court, it won't hold up. You see, this is where the wool was being pulled over people's eyes. To test for a flu virus, a respiratory virus, you only need a sputum sample. You don't need to go up the back of the nose. There's clearly another agenda there, that they're pushing so many people to get this PCR test. They're going up the back of the nose, where infections can be caused, but also you can plant things if you so desire. And also they can collect DNA as well, which there's a clause in one of the PCR kits that says that that even China can collect the DNA that's collected and store it. So these are the things that the public's not aware of, and we do have to protect our bodily autonomy, and that right is protected in Australia. But like everything else, it's been breached over the last 2 years.
Wow. Yeah, okay. Well, you have clarified a few things. A lot of this I wasn't aware of, and I knew it. I do a bit of research, but you've really clarified a lot of things. One thing I like to ask though is we get these huge numbers that they claim that they've done 50,000 tests in 24 hours. Is that possible, do you believe, with the infrastructure we have?
Look, I'm not I'm not across the testing of it in that sense. Okay. What I'm across is literally the processes that have been introduced that were previously not used in the past. So as of 2020, for example, the government funded the hospitals to set up these PCR testing clinics in the population, these drive-ins where healthy people without symptoms had this test that was being run at these high amplifications to get these false positives when they wanted to frighten the public and lock them down. And, that's how we've been manipulated. So yes, in terms of the numbers, I can't really help to tell you how many can be done in so many hours.
No worries. No, that's really great. Well, are you okay? I know we sort of said like an hour. Are you able to answer a few questions? I'm not sure if you have to jet off quickly or.
Yeah, I can just do a few questions. That's fine.
Yep. Okay. Well, if anyone's got any questions, just put your hand up, or you can maybe, if they're in the write them in the chat. Nick.
Hey, Nick.
Oh, you're on mute.
There we go. Sorry. Thank you so much for all this information. It's very, very useful. Thanks, Dr. Judy. I'm just wondering, I know this is kind of a silly question and it might not have an answer you can give, but if someone was going to get one of these injections, or if you had to get one, which one would you get? I'm not going to get one. It's just that I have like my sister who's the parent to my nephews, and she's going to cave, and I just would like to, I don't know.
Yes, I wouldn't be getting the Pfizer or the Moderna. Yeah, and that's probably all I can say, really. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
David.
I think I'll try and be quick. I had a question about, because I've been hearing more about kids being forced to wear masks in school, and I've been doing a bit of research. I just would like to hear from a doctor. So I've been reading about hypoxia. Of course, if you have less oxygen going through your brain, it can cause like tissue damage and loss of concentration and things like that. And because I also work with kids, I had to do mandatory reporting. And in that reporting, it does mention that you are required by law to report any instances of abuse in children. And one of those is emotional, psychological abuse. And yeah, from what I've been reading, it sounds like masks, they cause a lack of oxygen. That, in your medical opinion, would that be considered abuse? And also, would there be other effects like? I was reading like a medical journal thing about when your cells, physical pain could be described as when the cells in your body die. So I was actually wondering if it could be maybe even just loosely considered possible physical abuse if they're suffering from lack of oxygen in their brain.
Absolutely.
But that's it.
It is. It's abuse. And let me put it to you another way. Healthy people wearing a mask. How does a healthy person prevent transmission of a disease in the community if they're healthy? We don't have any symptoms, and you're putting on a mask. And every second you have that mask on, and this is well documented in the literature, you're breathing in your own excretory products and suppressing your oxygen. Every second you put that on, you are running down your immune system and getting sick from having that on. And I will say also that the mask, the particles of the SARS-CoV-2, the virus, is much smaller than even the mesh that's on your face. It can get through anyway. It's not actually preventing that virus because the particles are so small. But healthy people should never be wearing masks. And what's life? What's life if you accept that a healthy person has to go around with a mask on your face? It's actually psychologically distressing to see people with that mask on, and they know that. Everything they've brought in is to make you less healthy and is to cause you psychological stress. Mental health has gone through the roof, and now we're subjected on the TV to seeing them being concerned about mental health. It's the media that's causing your mental health problems with this false pandemic and all of this created. The TV is a movie. It's creating a perception, a false perception. And there is no science to these directives. It's the opposite to what the academic literature tells you. So, they've reversed everything that everybody's learned about promoting health in the community. That's the tragedy. And of course, you can't promote health in the community if you remove the individual's autonomy to control their own health. That's a basic ethics of health promotion. And I'll say that, and one more is the doctors having autonomy to assess the medical literature for themselves to make those decisions of risk-benefit assessment. If you remove the doctor's autonomy to assess the medical literature for themselves, you're not promoting health in the community. Politicians don't have medical advice, the medical knowledge, and yet we now have a medical board that's controlled by politicians. Those ministers that don't have any medical qualifications are deciding what's the acceptable science and knowledge for doctors to be sprouting in the community, and they get deregistered if they put out knowledge from the medical literature that I'm putting out and have done in my PhD, and all the chronic illnesses and the overwhelming peer-reviewed journals that link the chronic illnesses to the vaccines and the vaccine program. But all of those journals are being ignored, and can be, because they reverse the onus of proof of harmlessness. If you take away the need to prove that a drug's safe, you can put it on the market and then just claim it's safe and ignore all the evidence that parents have brought to the government for decades. And it's being ignored, and it has been for decades, and now they're ignoring us, even though the government themselves are documenting blood clots, palsies, paralysis, seizures, convulsions, strokes, heart attacks. They're ignoring us, and the politicians are going ahead and injecting every citizen, when we're all have different genetics. Now, what makes sense about that?
Thanks for that. Oh, no, one last little thing on that note, sorry. Will that also be considered when someone's treating another healthy person as if they're sick? Will that be considered as, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, but Munchausen by proxy, where like a parent might treat their child like they're sick even though they're perfectly healthy to get attention or whatever it might be?
I can't really say a lot on that topic.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but
Thank you.
I think what we need to get back to normal, and all we're doing is going back to 2019 for the decades and centuries that we've had before that. A sick person is someone with symptoms. So the media is reporting cases, as is the government. We need to challenge them and say, what are the symptoms of these people? If they're not in hospital or dying, then they're not a serious case of disease. And we are being frightened with cases that we have cases of flu every year, and they're never reported because people get sick for a couple of days and then they're better and they have immunity from that. And in this case, we're even being told that a case is someone that doesn't even have any symptoms. Okay, so we have to get serious, and we have to start, getting back the public interest in these health policies. The pharmaceutical companies have taken over.
Thank you very much for that.
I've just got a question in the comments here. How dangerous is shedding?
That is still to be decided. That's something that we can't really tell because this is an experiment. There's certainly lots and lots and lots of anecdotal evidence, and particularly with disruptions to the menstrual cycle. The doctors that I've listened to are suggesting that it's more likely to happen with bodily fluids. Okay, so not necessarily just being in the proximity of somebody that's been vaccinated. And I'd imagine it's more likely, the sooner after they've had the injection rather than, several days or weeks later. So my concern is that all of this knowledge is just dividing the community even more. And that's why I think people need to just really assess that and consider it a low risk, but recognise that it's a risk. But please, don't divide your family and friends on that. And please also remove the words anti-vaxxer from your discussions, pro and anti-vaxxer. It was never about being for a procedure or against the procedure. That literally is a word. The anti-vaxxer word is what's causing many people to just walk into their own deaths and illnesses because they're so stigmatized and don't want to be called an anti-vaxxer. It was the medical industry that coined that term purposely to, indoctrinate people. And we've got to get rid of it from our language. And we mustn't call people unvaccinated. Okay, we're not unvaccinated. We're normal, healthy people. We don't need vaccines to live. And if we let the government call us unvaccinated, those quarantine camps are being built for us, okay? It won't be long. The timeline is end of December, early January, and we all need to come together, the jabbed and the unjabbed. As I said, vaccines are a choice. And we've lived with vaccinated and unvaccinated people forever. Let's not change that. Everyone has the choice. That's all we're asking. And, no bullying and intimidation and ridicule. We've got to get rid of that culture that we've had for 2 decades now. And it's the government inciting the public. This idea that Monica Smith can be put in jail for incitement. Oh, what? Because she's promoting democracy in a democratic country. This is the government, is using double speak, and we've got to get this, we've all got to address it. We've all got to stand up together.
Yep. Do you have time for I've got 3 hands up. I know you've got to go and
Yeah, we'll just do the 3. Yep.
Just do the 3? Okay. All right. Mercy.
Hi. Thank you so much, Dr. Judy. Thank you. So I work in aged care for, another 2 days, as far as I know. I'm being told not to turn up for work on Monday, so I'm not really sure what's going to happen. I 100% agree with what you said about the freedom actually was the day that, Freedom Day was the day that more restrictions came in. That was the day that I was actually creating QR codes for separate rooms within the retirement village, like completely insane. So I'm kind of secretly hoping that I do lose my job. But I'm just wondering about the risk assessment. You mentioned that as far as I rang WorkSafe and, they're saying that risk assessment is, it's only their job to assess the risks of COVID and not the vaccine, because if we choose not to have it, then that's, it's not the responsibility of the organisation, So can you speak to that a little bit? If
It's a very interesting point. I'm glad you actually brought that up, because so we've got employers mandating a drug that hasn't been tested in the human population, that we know is genetic therapy and an experiment, and they don't have any law to say, there's nothing in your contract that says your employer can medicate you. And this is an experimental drug, it's not a vaccine. And even if it was, it still doesn't come into your contract. And there's no reasonable grounds for an employer to actually put it in place, because it doesn't prevent you getting COVID, it doesn't prevent you dying from COVID, and it doesn't prevent transmission in the community. So this is where you need to challenge your employers. And guess what? The employers are liable, okay? So whilst the government has actually indemnified all doctors using our taxpayer money to give you this experimental shot that could harm and certainly destroy the quality of your life, forever, doctors are indemnified to harm us, and it's our taxpayer money that's protecting them. But employers aren't, and they will be liable. So if you point out the risks of these injections, and if anybody needs information on this and what action they can take if they're being forced to take an injection they don't want, go to the Australians Say No website. Okay, this is the website that it's Serene Tefahar from Advocate Me, but we've got a whole team of lawyers now, and we've directed all professions through the Australians Say No website. And you can go to your profession or simply just join up, and you'll get directions on what you should do if your employer has mandated this illegal injection. Okay, now they're coercing you by not giving you any time to do anything. You're literally having to say, I'll have it by tomorrow, or else they're saying they'll terminate you. So if you recognise that having jab 1 and then having jab 2, and then there's jab 3 and 4, which we've seen in the UK and in Israel, it's not going to stop at jab 1. And every time you have an injection, that can destroy your quality of life and might even be permanently physically damaging. So you've got to decide when you want to join the fight, okay? But there's many of us are fighting, and we won't be stopping. So there is a fight, and if you join this website, you'll join millions of people across Australia and the world that are fighting this, and it'll give you strength to do that. I will tell you that Serene Tefaha has, as of today, actually submitted a court class action against the mandates, and this was submitted in New South Wales, but it's actually going to be submitted in every state. Okay, so it is state action against these mandates, and it's actually been organised over many months. This isn't a quick, racing it in and then getting knocked back because we didn't have the arguments in place. I do want you to know that there's been a lot of thought. The arguments are well thought out, and we have international experts that will be representing us in court over the next few weeks. Okay, so the court action started. For people that are going to lose their jobs imminently if they take action, the recommendation is we've got a declination form, a vaccine declination form, which explains in the government's own words that this isn't beneficial to the person and that there's lots of harms, and there's, that's all set out. So you can give that to your employer and explain why you don't wish to take the injection. If you get terminated, the next thing is there's more directions on the website. You'll do a fair work claim, which the lawyers will help you with. And then, of course, you'll be in the class action as well. So that's all that hard work of finding a lawyer is already taken out for you. You just direct it in. You'll be put in a Telegram group with like-minded people to support you. And
Judy, we actually have Serene on tomorrow, or she's going to be
excellent.
Tomorrow. So that's at 7:30. So
she's done great work. She is the one lawyer that stood up right at the beginning, and she has exposed that we're all protected under that Biosecurity Act 2015, and she's actually done the most to expose the fraud.
Yeah, I have actually done all that. Like, I sent an email like weeks ago with all the legislations that they're in breach of, asking them to, so I've sort of, I have been proactive, and I'm definitely fighting. There's no doubt about that. But there's just different sort of avenues. Some people are going with the Privacy Act, and some people are going with the work health and safety. So, but that's really helpful.
I think if you go through Australians Say No, you'll get directives with respect to your own situation, and then you can modify the template letters to suit your what you need to say to your employer. And then the actual steps are stated for you as well once you've done that.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, and I'd just like to say to everyone, we do need to start up a new community. It's very difficult, I know, because they're pulling the fabric of our whole lives out from under us, and people have wives and families and kids that they're supporting. But the thing is, everybody's going to have to decide when they join this fight, because there's no freedom if we don't. And you might go for jab 1 or jab 2 and then realise that, that's it. But because we're all going to have to fight it together. So as I said, it's jabbed and unjabbed together here, and everyone's going to have to make their own decisions as to when to join the fight. But try and find a like-minded community to keep yourself positive, to look for new skills that you can learn, and enjoy your time off work. Try and turn it into a positive.
Yep, absolutely. And that's what I always say to all the people on the Peacemakers platform, always, and say to them, if they beat you in the mind, they've beaten you. Okay, you have to have strong morale and a strong spirit and keep them up. If you believe there's no way out and that you've already lost, then you've already lost.
That's it. And what's important in life? I mean, really and truly, your health is the most important thing, because you can't have quality of life without it. And you can't enjoy your friends and family and your kids if you don't have quality of life. And they've really overstepped the mark here. Every medical ethic and international human rights covenant that we've ever believed in has been violated. What sort of a life do you want? We all have to start reassessing what we want out of life and how we want to go about getting it, because there's lots of positives that we can get out of this situation.
Yeah. Amen. We'll just go with I've got Ivana and then there's Gail. Yeah, there are two more hand questions.
Thanks, Nick. Hi, Judy. Thank you too, Judy.
Hi.
Just a quick question. Now, I'm more concerned with school going back soon, considering a lot of the kids already been indoctrinized, and I'm noticing just when my child was at home, just listening to her Zoom, the teachers were, let's say, they were just saying like, oh, we've been vaccinated, and guess what we're doing this weekend? We're going on a picnic with all our other families being vaccinated.
It's a tragedy. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm really concerned because I'm speaking to other mothers, and it seems like these kids are on TikTok or whatever they're doing, but they're all in like, we want the vax.
Yeah, I'd have to say, Ivana, it's actually not safe to send your kids to school at the moment.
Yeah.
The curriculum has been taken over. The pharmaceutical companies are promoting a drug to your children. They even have allowed the age of consent to a drug to be 12, without the parents' knowledge. Parents need to start fighting back. You need to actually, possibly even refuse to send your child to school and do this en masse as, a mass of parents standing up together and say, we want the age of consent for a drug, to be 18 or whatever it should be, because you weren't consulted when they changed it to 12. Our children are now just prey for the pharmaceutical companies. They can't decide what's right and wrong, and it's a parent's right to protect their children. Okay, so if you really want to protect your children, you've got to get rid of that curriculum. You've got to refuse to send your kids to school at the moment because they are coming for the children now. And it is sad, yeah. And it's not just the vaccines that are being indoctrinated into the children at the moment. The schools have been taken over, and they're not places for health policies, for medical policies to be administered. And, teachers are indoctrinated as well, with this information from the health department. This is the thing, the government is now providing false and misleading information to teachers, and teachers have been told that's the only information they're allowed to provide to students is from the health department. Okay, and of course that's politicians. It's not medical advice. So I would recommend that we need to take back control of schools. They are places for education, not for medications to be given. And let's take a stand.
Thank you. I agree. Thank you, Judy.
Good. Oh, Nick, your microphone's off.
Sorry. Gail.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, thanks a lot, Judy. This is so interesting. I did actually put this question in the comments, and somebody replied, but I wanted to get your professional opinion, because I've been looking into vaccinations for many, many, many years, but then I kind of stopped, and then I started again when this all happened. And I'm just wanted your opinion on vaccination in pets, like your dogs and cats. Is that the same situation?
Very much. It's very much the same situation. And in fact, some of my research originally came from the dogs. They knew that the sarcomas and the cancers were being caused by the vaccines. And, for a while there, they did reduce the vaccinations of pets, but then, of course, that's been expanded again as well. It's exactly the same. So yeah. Cancers and autoimmune diseases and the allergies that dogs and cats are getting, diabetes, it's all the same.
Yeah, I thought so. Yeah. I've stopped now the last 2 years. Yeah. And because my last dog died of a serious brain tumor, and I thought, right. yeah. And
they're dying younger now. The dogs are dying younger, without a doubt. That's a trend. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Judy. Look, you are an amazingly inspired woman. You've been a blessing for all of us. And look, I'm just so grateful that you've been able to share, because you've really inspired me. Like I feel really confident to now have these discussions with people. I have discussions with people all the time. Like I just do. I talk a lot, but I feel much more, inspired and encouraged to have these discussions, knowing that, you know, what we knew inside, it's backed by the evidence, it's backed by the science. We've got someone like yourself sharing that with that, you know, that authority behind it.
That's great to hear, Nick, because it isn't rocket science, and a lot of it is just common sense with drugs, you know, but because it's been framed to you through the media, the corporate-sponsored media, with industry-funded science that they have manipulated in statistics, people aren't seeing it, and that's why we've got this division now. You've got to take your glasses off and look from another perspective. It's literally, this is a drug, it's chemicals being injected into the body, genetics is the bottom line. Okay, so for anyone that wants to feel empowered to speak up, because that's something that I think about often as well. You know, I could never have spoken up as I have if I didn't research the history for myself to find out what controlled the diseases. So on my website, Vaccination Decisions, I do sell my book, Vaccination Australia's Loss of Health Freedom. My thesis is in there, but I've also included some endorsements from health professionals who have observed the decline in children's health as our program expanded. I also added an extra chapter to talk about the strategies that have been used to suppress me, to denigrate, ridicule. My reputation has been destroyed on Wikipedia. They lock Wikipedia so that we can't actually change it. And this is just simply, money is power. Money is power to control knowledge. And that's how we've ended up in this medical tyranny. If we were to just get rid of the government control of the Medical Regulatory Board, doctors could be free again to promote health in the community. But at the moment, they're not. If you mandate a drug in every human being with genetic diversity, you're going to promote sickness and health. And that's where we are today. And that's why every Australian needs to get together, go on strike. All the people with jobs need to support the people that are losing their jobs. We do a national strike and we say no, because these people are tyrants, they're lawless. There is no law to support anything that is going on in this country today.
Amen. Amen. Well, that's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Now, guys, just remember that we've got Serene Tefaha tomorrow. So, and that will carry on, I think, perfectly from you know what you've shared with us today, because now we've got the the understanding of what's going on medically. Now we can ask the questions legally. What do we do legally, and how do we defend ourselves on that on that position? So the is there anything you want to add before we finish? Anything else?
Only that in numbers we have power. And so my new motto is, together we can get out of this. We're not in this together. Together we can get out of this. Okay. Yeah. So all of us, whether you believe in vaccines or you don't, let's not divide. Let's have it. If we unify Australia, nobody wants to live in a discriminated Australia. And we've already got it now. Medical apartheid's in New South Wales, Victoria. We can no longer, the unvaccinated are restricted. And I shouldn't have called them unvaccinated. We call them the healthy people are restricted, okay? We've got to change this terminology. No such thing as an unvaccinated person. We don't need vaccines to live. They are healthy people and they're being discriminated against. We build a unified Australia, and everyone with jobs must instigate now a national strike to support all the people that are losing their jobs for the crime of trying to keep themselves healthy. If we want a functional society, let's all join together and do that. And now, it's got to be now. Yeah.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for being here and joining us. Let's get this message out. Let's share the information that we've learned here. Let's share it out. We'll load this up onto the YouTube and Rumble. And go over it, watch it again, learn this information and share it around, because the more that we share the truth, remember the narrative's just a big lie. That's where their power comes from. It's this false narrative. If we can break that down with the truth, the truth's on our side, we can win it. No, that's brilliant. Look, thank you so much, and hopefully we can do another like webinar like this in the future sometimes. And just really grateful for what you're doing. It's brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Nick, and thanks for providing the platform so that people can learn the truth. You can't fight what you don't understand, and that's as simple as that.
Thanks a lot. Okay.
Thank you.
See ya. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Judy.
Okay.
Take care, everybody.
Bless you.
Thank you.